Hello, and welcome back to Bedtime Fables. It's time to get cozy and let the day's worries melt away like butter in a warm pan. Tonight, our story takes us to a sweet-smelling little bakery where a kind old baker and a very small mouse are about to go on a very important quest for a lost memory. Let the story begin. On a quiet cobblestone street, in a town where the mornings always smelled of happiness, there was a little shop called the Sunrise Bakery. It was the most wonderful place in the world. Its windows were always filled with the most delightful treats, cookies that sparkled with sugar dust, cupcakes that wore fluffy crowns of frosting, and great round loaves of bread with crusts that were as golden and as crackly as autumn leaves. The bakery was not just a shop, it was the heart of the town, a place of warmth and sweetness and comfort, and the keeper of all this warmth and sweetness was a kind old baker who was loved by everyone. His name was Arthur, and he was a baker whose heart was as soft and as warm as his famous cinnamon rolls. For 50 years he had woken up before the sun, his hands moving with a familiar, loving rhythm as he mixed and kneaded and shaped his wonderful creations. He didn't just use flour and sugar, he used a little bit of magic. He knew the recipe for courageous cookies, which could make a nervous child feel brave on their first day of school. He knew the secret to Happy Cupcakes, which could turn any frown upside down, and he knew how to bake sunshine loaves, bread so full of warmth and joy that it could make even the rainiest day feel bright. His recipes were a secret, a magical inheritance passed down from his own grandmother, and he guarded them in the safest place of all, his memory. But one morning, something was very wrong. The sun rose, but no sweet, golden smells drifted from the bakery's chimney. The little bell over the door did not jingle with the sound of happy customers. Inside, the bakery was quiet and cool and still. Arthur was standing in the middle of his beautiful flour-dusted kitchen, surrounded by all of his familiar ingredients. But he wasn't baking, he was just standing there, a deep, foggy confusion in his kind, crinkly eyes. He looked at the flour, and he looked at the sugar, and for the first time in his entire life, he couldn't remember what to do with them. The recipes, his beautiful, magical, and most precious recipes, were gone. They had vanished from his memory, like a dream upon waking. Now, Arthur was not entirely alone in his bakery. In a tiny, cozy mouse hole behind a large sack of whole wheat flour, lived a very small but very brave field mouse named Pip. Pip loved Arthur. He knew the baker was a kind and gentle man who would always leave a few of the sweetest, crunchiest crumbs on the floor for him at the end of the day. Pip had woken up, his nose twitching, expecting the wonderful, familiar smell of baking bread to fill the air. But when he smelled nothing, he knew something was wrong. He crept out of his hole and saw his dear friend, the baker, standing so still and looking so very, very sad. Pip's tiny mouse heart was filled with a great, big worry. Pip knew that Arthur never used a recipe book. He kept all the magic in his head. But Pip, being a small and curious creature, had explored every single nook and cranny of the bakery. He remembered seeing something long ago on the highest, dustiest shelf in the pantry. It was an old wooden box, carved with flowers and birds, and he had heard the baker's wife many years ago call it the memory box. Pip had an idea, a tiny spark of hope. Perhaps, just perhaps, the forgotten recipes were written down and hidden inside that old forgotten box. But the shelf was so very, very high. It was a mountain for a tiny mouse. But Pip was a very brave mouse. With a determined squeak, his great quest began. He found a long piece of baker's twine, and using it like a mountain climber's rope, he began to climb. He scaled the great smooth cliffs of the flour tins. He navigated the treacherous, narrow ledges past the jars of cinnamon and cloves, their spicy smells making his nose tingle with excitement. He crept carefully past a sleeping bag of sugar, its sweetness a wonderful, tempting aroma. It was a long and difficult climb, but the thought of his sad friend waiting below gave him all the strength he needed. At last, he reached the top shelf. It was dark and dusty, and covered in a thick, soft blanket of cobwebs. And there it was, the old, carved wooden box. It was heavy, and the lid was stuck fast. Pip pushed with his nose. He pushed with his paws. He pushed with all his might, his little muscles straining, until, with a loud, slow creak, the heavy lid began to open. And as it opened, a soft, warm and magical golden light spilled out, along with the most wonderful and complex smell he had ever encountered. It was the smell of 100 happy memories, all sleeping together in one place. Pip peered inside. The box was filled with old, beautiful recipe cards, each one written in the elegant, looping handwriting of the baker's grandmother. He had been right. The recipes were here. But his heart sank. The ink on the cards was so old that it had faded almost completely away. The words were just faint, ghostly whispers on the yellowed paper. He couldn't read them, and he knew Arthur, the kind, elderly baker with a round, gentle face and a big, soft, snow-white mustache. Feeling a little bit defeated, Pip leaned closer to one of the cards, the one for Sunshine Loaf, and as he did, he smelled it. The card itself held a faint magical scent, a mixture of warm yeast, sweet honey, and something else, something that smelled like a bright sunny morning. It was the memory of the bread itself, captured in the very paper it was written on. And as he breathed in that wonderful forgotten smell, something incredible happened. The faint ghostly words on the card began to glow with a warm golden light, the faded ink becoming bright and clear, and perfectly easy to read once more. Pip's little nose twitched. He suddenly understood. The recipes were not just in the words, they were in the smells. Pip's little heart was filled with a new and exciting plan. If the smells could wake the words, then he would have to become a collector of scents. He looked down at the magical glowing recipe card for the Sunshine Loaf. The first ingredient on the list was not flour or yeast, but something far more magical. It read, 1 spoonful of morning sun. Pip looked up at the flour-dusted window of the bakery. A single beautiful golden sunbeam was streaming through, illuminating a patch of the floor. But how could a tiny mouse possibly capture a spoonful of sunlight? It was a liquid he could not hold, a warmth he could not carry. He knew this would not be an easy task, but the thought of his friend Arthur, a kind, elderly man with a round, gentle face and a big, soft, snow-white mustache, standing so sad and lost, gave him all the courage he needed to try. He scurried back down the twine rope and began his search. He couldn't carry a spoon, and he couldn't carry a cup, but he knew he needed something to hold the light. On the windowsill, in a little pot, was a cheerful yellow buttercup. One of its petals had fallen onto the floor, and it was the perfect shape, a tiny golden waxy bowl. With all his strength, he dragged the little petal cup into the very center of the sunbeam that streamed through the window. He watched as the sunbeam filled the little cup, its light and its warmth soaking into the petal until the buttercup itself began to glow with the pure, brilliant, and wonderful light of the morning sun. He had done it. He had captured his spoonful of sunlight. Now came the hardest part. He had to carry his precious glowing cargo all the way back up to the high, dusty shelf. He took the stem of the buttercup petal carefully in his teeth and began to climb the long, swaying baker's twine once more. It was much more difficult this time, carrying the wobbly, glowing petal. He had to move slowly and carefully, his little muscles aching with the effort. He kept his eyes fixed on the high shelf above, his mind focused on his mission. He thought of the warm, happy smell of freshly baked bread, and it gave him the strength to keep climbing, one tiny, brave paw-hold at a time. Finally, he reached the top. He was out of breath, and his little legs were trembling, but he had made it. He scurried over to the memory box and took out the recipe card for the Sunshine Loaf. He held his glowing buttercup petal directly over the faded, ghostly words. As the pure, concentrated sunlight from the petal washed over the old, yellowed paper, a wonderful thing happened. The entire card flared with a warm, golden light, and the words, which had been so faint and unreadable, now appeared as if written in fresh new ink, dark and clear and bold. The first recipe was remembered. The first memory was saved. And as the recipe card came back to life, it released a tiny, magical puff of its memory scent, a warm golden wisp that smelled of sunshine, and yeast, and sweet honey, drifted down from the high, dusty shelf. It floated through the quiet air of the bakery and found its way to where old Arthur was sitting, his head in his hands. He took a slow, sad breath, and then he paused. His magnificent baker's nose twitched. He had smelled something. Something faint, something distant, but something wonderfully familiar. He lifted his head, a single tiny spark of hope beginning to glow in the foggy confusion of his mind. He didn't know what it was, but it smelled a little bit like a happy morning. Pip felt a surge of triumph. It was working. He eagerly turned to the next recipe card in the box. This one was for the famous courageous cookies, the ones that could make anyone feel brave. He sniffed the card, and its faint spicy smell of ginger and cinnamon made the first ingredient glow. But as he read the words, his little mouse heart sank. The recipe called for something impossible. It needed the roar of a lion. Pip had never even seen a lion. There were certainly no lions in the quiet little town. How could a tiny mouse possibly find something as big and as loud and as scary as a lion's roar? He sat for a moment, his whiskers drooping with disappointment. A lion's roar, it was impossible. But Pip was not just a brave mouse. He was a very clever mouse. His eyes scanned the great towering shelves of the pantry, searching for an answer, and then he saw it. On a lower shelf, there was a big yellow box of dandelion tea, a brand the baker loved because it was said to make you feel strong and brave. And on the front of that box, in beautiful bright colors, was a picture of a magnificent proud lion, its mouth wide open in a great, powerful, and very courageous looking roar. It wasn't a real roar, but perhaps, just perhaps, the idea of a roar was all the recipe needed. Getting to the tea box was another great challenge. It was on a different shelf, with a wide, empty space in between. But Pip, now full of a new sense of purpose, was not discouraged. He saw a long string of dried red peppers that the baker used for his spicy bread, and it was hanging from one shelf to the other, like a long, bumpy and very wobbly bridge. Taking a deep breath, he put one tiny paw in front of the other, and began to walk, a brave little acrobat on a high wire of spice, his eyes fixed on the picture of the brave roaring lion. He made it. He reached the tea box and stood right before the magnificent painted lion. He closed his eyes and took a deep, brave sniff. He didn't smell a lion, of course. He smelled the wonderful earthy and slightly bitter scent of dried dandelion root, a smell that always made him feel stronger and more awake. He imagined the great, loud roar that would come from such a magnificent beast. He gathered up all of that feeling, all of that brave, strong and powerful smell, into his own little nose. He didn't have a buttercup petal this time. He would have to carry the scent memory itself. He scurried back across his pepper bridge and returned to the memory box. He took out the faded recipe card for courageous cookies and held it in his paws. He took a deep breath, and then he exhaled, a tiny powerful puff of air that carried all the strong, brave and courageous scent of the dandelion. As the magical scent washed over the old paper, the card flared to life with a brilliant, spicy, orange light. And the words, which had been faint and sleepy, woke up, bold and strong once more. The second recipe was saved, and from the high shelf another wonderful, magical wisp of a memory. This one smelling of ginger and cinnamon and a tiny hint of a lion's brave roar, began to drift down towards the sad, waiting baker. Down below, another wonderful scent reached Arthur's nose. It was not the gentle scent of a sunny morning, but something bold and spicy. It smelled of ginger and cinnamon, and a feeling of bravery. The foggy confusion in his mind swirled, and for a single brilliant moment, a clear memory broke through. He remembered a little girl, years ago, who had been afraid to ride her new bicycle. He remembered giving her a warm, freshly baked, courageous cookie, shaped like a little lion. He remembered the proud, happy smile on her face, as she took her first wobbly but successful ride down the cobblestone street. It was a good memory, a happy memory. He still couldn't remember the recipe, but he remembered the feeling. A little more of the fog had lifted. Pip, a very small but very brave field mouse with soft, dusty brown fur, large, intelligent black eyes, and a tiny twitching pink nose, from his high perch could feel the baker's tiny flicker of returning memory, and it gave him a surge of happy energy. He turned to the next card. This one was for the famous Happy Cupcakes, the little cakes of pure joy that could make anyone smile. He sniffed its faint, sweet, sugary scent, and the first ingredient began to glow. But this one was perhaps the most impossible of all. The recipe did not call for sugar, or vanilla, or anything from the pantry. The first and most important ingredient for Happy Cupcakes was the laughter of a friend. How in the world could a little mouse, all alone on a high, dusty shelf, possibly find and capture the sound of laughter? Pip knew he could not make this ingredient himself. It had to come from the baker. But Arthur, a kind, elderly man with a round, gentle face and a big, soft, snow-white mustache, was in no mood for laughing. Pip scurried down the shelves and across the quiet kitchen floor, his mind racing. He needed to find a memory of laughter. He climbed up onto the dusty old mantelpiece above the cold fireplace, and there, tucked behind an old clock, he found it. It was a photograph, a captured moment from a long, long time ago. In it, a much younger baker Arthur was standing with his beautiful, smiling wife, his arm around her, and they were both laughing, their heads thrown back in a moment of pure, uncomplicated joy. This was it. This was the memory. But how could he get the baker to see it? With a great deal of effort, his little paws pushing against the heavy silver frame, Pip began to nudge the photograph towards the edge of the mantelpiece. He pushed, and he pushed, and he pushed, until with a soft little thump, the picture frame tipped over and landed face up on the wooden ledge. The small sound was just enough to draw the baker's attention. Arthur looked up from his table, his sad eyes slowly focusing on the mantelpiece and on the forgotten photograph that now lay there. Arthur slowly got up and walked over to the fireplace. He picked up the old photograph, his hand trembling just a little. He looked at the faces of his younger self and his dear departed wife, and he remembered that day. It was a sunny afternoon at the village fair, and he had just won her a silly prize. He remembered the sound of her laugh, a sound like 100 tiny silver bells. And as he remembered her laugh, a new sound filled the quiet bakery. It was a soft sound at first, a little rusty from disuse. It was his own laugh, a quiet, rumbling chuckle that shook his whole body. He was remembering happiness, and as the baker laughed, Pip knew he had to be quick. He had found an empty snail shell on his journey up the mantelpiece, a perfect, pearly, and spiraled little container. He held it up, and as the beautiful, warm sound of Arthur's laughter filled the air, Pip caught it. He caught the feeling, the joy, the very essence of the happy memory inside the little shell. The shell began to glow with a warm, swirling, and multicolored light, a perfect, captured piece of pure joy. He had his ingredient. He had his spoonful of a friend's laughter, with his heart feeling as light and as happy as the laughter he now carried. Pip scurried back up to the pantry, back to the memory box. He took out the recipe card for the Happy Cupcakes and held the glowing snail shell over it. A beautiful rainbow-colored light poured from the shell and onto the faded paper. The card flared to life with a joyful, brilliant light, and the old, tired words woke up, dancing on the page in bright, happy colors. The third recipe was saved, and from on high, a wonderful, sweet, and magical wisp of a memory, this one smelling of vanilla and strawberries and pure, happy laughter, began to drift down towards the waiting baker. Arthur stood by the window, the old photograph held close to his heart. He could now smell the scent of his own laughter, mingling with the memory of cinnamon and the warm promise of a sunny morning. The thick, grey fog that had filled his mind was beginning to thin. He could see patches of clear blue sky. He remembered the feel of dough in his hands. He remembered the warmth of the oven. He remembered the happy faces of the children who would press their noses against his shop window. He was not just a sad old man in a quiet room. He was Arthur. He was a baker. Pip knew there was one final recipe, one last memory to unlock. He looked into the box and found the last, most special card of all. It was for a bedtime story loaf, a special sleepy bread that Arthur, the kind, elderly baker, only ever baked for his own grandchildren. Pip sniffed the card, and its gentle, comforting scent of warm milk and nutmeg made the final magical ingredient glow with a soft, silvery light. It was the most mysterious ingredient of all. It needed a whisper of a shared secret. Pip knew, in his wise little mouse heart, that this secret was the one between him and the baker. Pip did not need to climb down. He did not need an ingredient. The ingredient was the story of this very morning. He stood at the very edge of the high shelf, right above where the baker was standing. He looked down at his dear friend, and for the first time, he let himself be seen. He gathered up all his courage, and he let out a single tiny and very meaningful squeak. It was a squeak that said, "I am here." It was a squeak that said, "I am your friend." It was a squeak that said, "I helped you remember." It was the whisper of their shared secret, a secret of a tiny mouse who had gone on a great brave quest to help the kind old baker who had always saved him a crumb. Arthur, a kind elderly man with a round, gentle face and a big, soft, snow-white mustache, looked up. He saw the high, dusty shelf, the open memory box, and the tiny, brave little mouse looking down at him. And as he heard that single, clear squeak, the last of the fog in his mind dissolved like mist in the morning sun. Everything came rushing back in a warm, gentle, and beautiful wave. He remembered the recipes. He remembered the smell of the sunshine loaf, the feeling of the courageous cookies, the joy of the happy cupcakes, and he understood, with a deep, profound, and heart-filling warmth, that his tiny, forgotten, crumb-eating friend had just gone on a great and heroic journey, all to help him remember. He looked at Pip, a very small but very brave field mouse with soft, dusty brown fur, and his eyes, no longer cloudy with confusion, filled with tears of pure, overwhelming gratitude. A great, rumbling laugh, a real one this time, full of joy and life, boomed through the bakery. "Oh, you wonderful little mouse," Arthur cried, his voice full of happiness. He didn't waste another moment. He bustled around his kitchen, his movements once again full of the familiar, expert rhythm of a master baker. He pulled out his biggest mixing bowl. He gathered the flour and the sugar and the eggs. His hands, which had felt so lost and useless just a little while ago, now knew exactly what to do. The sad, quiet bakery was quiet no longer. It was filled with the happy, clattering, and wonderful sounds of a baker who had found his memory and his joy once more. And the first thing he baked was a sunshine loaf. He didn't need the recipe card anymore. The memory, unlocked by the scent and the story, was now safe in his heart once more. As the beautiful golden loaf baked in the oven, a wonderful, warm, and comforting smell began to fill the bakery. It was the smell of happiness, the smell of a new beginning, the smell of a memory, once lost, now found. The Sunrise Bakery was back, and its heart was beating with a warm and steady rhythm once more. When the loaf was cool enough to cut, Arthur took the very first slice, and from that slice he took the very best, most perfect golden crumb, and he placed it on his workbench. "For my brave little friend," he said softly. Pip, who had scurried all the way back down, crept out onto the workbench. It was the biggest, most delicious-looking crumb he had ever seen in his entire life. He nibbled on it, and its warm, sweet, and sunny taste was the taste of a great adventure and a wonderful friendship. The baker and the mouse shared their first meal together, a silent, happy feast of gratitude, and from that day on, Arthur, a kind, elderly man with a round, gentle face and a big, soft, snow-white mustache, never forgot his recipes again. But just in case, he gave Pip, a very small but very brave field mouse with soft, dusty brown fur, a very important new job. Pip was no longer just a resident of the bakery. He was the official keeper of the scents. Every evening, the two friends would sit together and go over the old recipe cards, not because Arthur needed to remember the words, but because they both loved to remember the stories and the feelings that were baked into every single one of his wonderful, magical treats. And now, it is time for you to find your own warm, cozy, and sweet-smelling place of rest. It is time to let the busy day fade away, just like the baker's sad, foggy memory, and to let your own happy, warm memories fill you up as you get ready for a deep and peaceful sleep. Think of the most comforting smell you can imagine, and let it be your guide to the beautiful land of dreams. Imagine you are wrapped in a blanket that has just come out of a warm, cozy dryer. Feel its gentle, comforting heat seeping into your body, making every single one of your muscles feel soft and heavy and relaxed. It is a warmth that chases away all the chills and all the worries, leaving only a deep, profound sense of safety and peace. Let this wonderful sleepy warmth spread from your toes all the way to the top of your head. Listen to the quiet, peaceful rhythm of your own breathing. Let it be as slow and as steady as the baker's hands kneading the soft dough. A long, gentle breath in, and a long, sleepy breath out. This peaceful, repetitive rhythm is a lullaby, a special song just for you. It is telling your body and your mind that the day's work is done, and it is now time for a deep, long and wonderful rest. The world is growing so very quiet now. The bakery is sleeping, the last crumb has been swept away, and the last dish has been washed. A deep, comfortable silence has settled over the whole town. Let that deep, peaceful quiet fill your own room now. It is a safe quiet, a cozy quiet, a sleepy, sleepy quiet that is preparing you for the most wonderful, magical dreams. You are so very sleepy now. Your mind is quiet, your body is still. You are ready to let go and float away into the beautiful, peaceful, and sweet-smelling land of dreams. It is a wonderful place, made just for you, where you can rest and dream and wake up in the morning, feeling happy and refreshed and ready for a new day. You are almost there, just let yourself drift. Thank you for visiting the bakery with us at Bedtime Fables. There is always a new sweet story waiting to be baked. If you would like to be here for it, you can ask your grown-up to tap the subscribe button so we can all meet again for our next sleepy adventure. Until then, may your dreams be full of the sweetest memories. Good night.